think I'm audible.
Yeah, I think
My
you don't need the mic.
for recording purpose.
Oh, so recording,
If it's
yeah.
not
You want-
recording, then
It's audible.
I think
It's audible.
fine.
He or audible?
Yeah, I'm a journalist and I worked. In 2011. I'm a foreign affairs journalist, by the way. I worked with Russia Today and Dhaka Tribune's India correspondent. I also covered Bollywood for a short stint. So 2011, when I was 18, I happened to be in the polling booth for the first time. At the same time, I got an assignment in Bengal for the C voter. So I checked the electoral behaviors and all. I have a couple of insights to add. But when you said, Dr. Dhar, when you mentioned about the 18 years age bracket, that's a very significant point. In psychological, that's a very meritorious group. But 18 of those days are very different of these days. It's a huge difference. And a couple of other metrics, you somehow bypassed. 2014, I think there is a revolution happened in 2017, which started in late 2016. The Geo came in. And within 3 months, they acquired something about 100 million of customers for free. And it altered the entire, the demography. Because all the data companies like the others, like several other got merged, several other,
Your question.
Yeah, the question is, sir, I just also wanted to make another perception.
Many more to.
It's not that the pollster is coming in the new age, but the digital has made it more measurable. Jabiullah Mujahid for the Taliban government, he does the same thing. Basically, the image welding. Zabinullah Mujahid, he used to run out of 4 studios. Probably they have gone out of more. So now my question is, what do you think of the swing voters and the bringing anti-incumbency factors in the local level? Not in the big elections like, the general election, but in a smaller assembly or in a smaller constituency or in the bipolar
Okay,
election.
thank you. So we'll collect some more of them and then who else has Yes.
Congratulations, Amok, for this excellent work. My question is with regard to the privacy and data protection, and with regard to the accountability of the what political consultants are doing. With the electoral bonds case coming out that the data needs to be revealed what the government is collecting. But now we see that there is a process of outsourcing surveillance of for electoral gain. So is there any way or even efforts being made to bring accountability over what and how political consultants are doing what they do? Are there any efforts to bring backstage into the front? Are there any people are doing something on that?
Okay, one last in this round and then.
That was a great presentation. So my question is, I work on the relationship of student politics and national politics. My PhD has a conclusion that student politics has slowly displaced ideological politics and increasingly it's become a professionalized space. Now when we take example of the 2016 Bengal election, data shows that IPAC recruited almost 70 to 75% student activists from JNU, from Hyderabad Central University and from the premier universities within Kolkata. All these activists, they worked at the ground level. They talked about their ideology and that has kind of resulted in preventing BJP from coming into Bengal. The activists which are working for IPAC, they have maintained that there is some amount of there's a resisting force within Bengalis itself, particularly the upper caste Bengalis. A lot of apprehension regarding BJP. IPAC has gone ahead and kind of capitalized on that fear of the Bengalis. At the same time, there also runs a parallel economic process where the lower level activists from IPAC or the people who work in IPAC, they go to the villages, the panchayats, and there is a monetary transaction happening there where the panchayat members, they are putting in money, giving money to IPAC members so that their nomination goes through within the party. So there is a sense of, there is disruption within party structure itself, which we were negating that that's not a cause. But in Bengal, we see that is definitely a cause through which professionalization is thriving. And it is also transforming student politics as a whole in India. So what are your thoughts on that?
Right, so student politics at the sort of ground level party organization.
Definitely.
Okay. Okay, in response to the first point, sorry, I'm still getting my head around. So the question was about swing factor anti-incumbency. I mean, that's clearly a demand-side variable that I also identify in the book, that partisan de-alignment with the rise and falling apart of stable vote blocks, even though vote blocks is inverted commas, you know, that's a bit, it's easily exaggerated. And the rise of a swing voter to some extent provides you with an alibi and gives politicians a reason to demand the services of these campaign consultants. That's also there in the book. But I think, again, it's easy to overstate that, and there's a supply side that I think that needs to match with it. On your point on GO2, I mean, I'm not disagreeing that after 2015 and by the time we go to 2019 or even the recent 2024 Lokniti CSDS national election studies, the digital user base of Instagram, YouTube, all social media platforms, it has arisen. The point that I was making was actually far more minimal, that if you want to explain the onset of professionalization at a given point of time, the digital user base does not give you sufficient reasons to completely give too much importance to that variable. So it was a very minimal argument. I'm not denying the fact that, of course, digital penetration and the larger economy of digital media has a role to play in how we think about politics, the way we consume politics. I think your point stands there. On the second question, are there any efforts to bring this backstage to the front stage? I would say very little, but maybe I can answer that question in a week's time, because next week I'm in Hyderabad for this unique conference that is being organized where it's sort of academics are meeting political consultants, practitioners for the first time. And I've never been in that sort of a space. So I'd be curious to hear whether there are people who are working in this industry who are willing to bring it to the front stage themselves. So it's a conversation maybe I can report back, but it's certainly, I've not come across anything, no efforts on the part of Election Commission of India to really grapple with this industry in a substantive way, right? So over the years, we've seen ECI pass memos on how to include, let's say, expenditure on social media within the overall expenditure limits that candidates have to abide by. There have been those sort of moves. But on the whole, I believe one of the biggest structural loopholes in how ECI monitors, both in terms of regulation of the moral code of conduct, but also the expenditure side, is that surrogate campaigns are just completely slipped through the radar. Yeah? And surrogate campaigns have happened even before campaign consultants entered the fray, but certainly increased that in size and scope. So far, I see very little effort to bring it from the shadows. On the third point, so there were multiple strands there. Let me just sort of quickly address. One thing is, I think that your question really touches upon, which I find quite interesting, is that, you know, when I used to be a student in Delhi University, at the end of your third year of your undergraduate degree, the biggest people who would come and offer the most attractive packages used to be your Google, your ENY, and occasional PwC. Now, from what I hear from the placement cells, the biggest packages and the most attractive packages are offered by campaign consulting firms, right? For a long time, IPAC was the biggest hirer in places such as TIS. Some in JNU, but I can't vouch for JNU, but the friends and professional circle that I have in TIS and DU, that was certainly true, circa 2016, the period that you're talking about. So that again says something about the motivation that this freshly minted students have to enter this domain. You know, the point that you make about what was happening in Bengal with Panchayat and monetary transactions, I think they index two very important points. One is that on the face of it, campaign professionals often speak the language of cleaning up politics, making politics more data-driven, more efficient, more cleaner. But those sort of instances that happen where, you know, they take money and then in the hopes of sort of nominating and forwarding someone's name as the prospective candidate show that the language of cleanliness, technocracy is actually very shallow, right? So criminalization, that old trope and the old chestnut through which we understand Indian politics, still sits cheek by jowl with professionalization, right? The two are actually quite joined at the hip. But the other thing that points towards is that even if in my causal framework, crisis in the party organization does not completely, to some extent it explains, but if it not, does not completely explain the onset of professionalization, the other causal direction, the causality does move in the other direction. Which is to say that the entry of these consultants, in some cases, has led to progressive weakening of the party structure, right? So even though my first point, you know, people might disagree on that, the second point, there is empirical evidence to suggest that. So yeah, that's how I will respond.
Okay, yeah.
I think it's a very interesting book. I have 2 to 3 points to make, and I essentially concerns your title. For example, if you look into the people who manage kind of the larger election campaign and other democracy. So if you look into the civil society groups, and if the civil society groups also play a very important role in managing the backstage of election, besides the political parties. I'm not ready a book, so I don't have idea how you have engaged with them, but the way in which you are looking at professionals or the technocrats as professionals. Civil society groups are equally very professional. So if we go back to legacy of the, for example, right to information movement, it is equally true that people from the middle classes, okay, they got together and they created a dent in the Official Secrets Act. In the larger practice of politics, if you look at Rajasthan, for example, or any other kind of state where civil society groups tend to influence election, or they tend to have say in the larger framing of the elections. So, for example, with the Congress party in the helm, they would be in a better position to negotiate or push through policies or kind of fulfill certain kind of demands. So, I think so in the framing of professionals, I think so in the framing of the backstage, civil society as an idea can also become an important player in looking into the ways in which you are the ways in which you are framing professionals. So this is my suggestion as well.
Okay. Yeah, yes.
Thank you Amol, for the presentation. It's beautiful. It's more of an, I want an explanation maybe. How do you methodologically locate the class of professionals within the term that you use as new middle class? Because going by the classical definition, it's more of a consumptionist nature, but now there are different tropes, as Professor Gulawardi, and you also mentioned about the American culture or Guru Shishya trope here. So, like, if you are putting them within this new middle class, how are you locating it, and how are you navigating the social fluidity that flows within this group?
Yeah.
This is something that you alluded to earlier as well. Like, India is increasingly aping the American political system, right, in terms of finances, campaign finances, which are almost deregulated at this moment. I mean, I would want you to address this counterfactual. What if India apes the social democracies of continental Europe, where you have publicly financed election campaigns? Not even that. For example, if we have severely regulated campaign finances, would the role of these technocrats, or for that matter consultants, simply diminish, or will they simply disappear? Or
I don't want, his book is just published, let it have. Okay, over to you.
Okay, on the first question, it's a provocative thought, but my instinct is to push back against it. For me, civil society is very much the realm of front stage. I do take the point that you are making, that there's something about, let's say, the lobbying process, or at least the way we understand lobbying, let's say in the case of the United States, which is very murky, happens in the shadows, and there, of course, there might be some claim that certain lobby groups could be included with the realm of the backstage. But I don't see, in India's case, the civil society groups who inherently adopt a position of being non-party or anti-party working in that space. I don't think they necessarily can be classified in the backstage realm. Because for me, whether it's the tactics, whether the kind of strategies that they foreground to mobilize themselves, for me that does not quite fit the definition of backstage, at least the way I construe it. Sure, there's lobbying at a certain level, which is not open to public eyes, but I think that's only incidental. I don't think that's definitionally important to the work that they're doing. So that would be my response. Secondly, new middle class. So I'll keep my responses brief. For me, to call themselves new middle class, it's a combination of two things. One is the objective materialist criteria or the consumption-based criteria, and the other is a more aspirational profile. Now, on the first hand, it is the fact that the members of Citizens for Accountable Governance, the firm that was working in the 2014 campaign of Prime Minister Modi, was the average age of a CAG member was 24 years. You work that backward, then you come to the fact that this is the demographic group that has grown up and has inculcated the political culture of the post-liberalization era. And you look at the kind of universities that they go to, and their tables in the book where I explore CAG's composition in greater detail. You look at the degrees that they study, IIT Kanpur engineering backgrounds, the kind of places that they were working at before they came and joined this industry, that from an objective materialist criteria tells you that they are part of the new middle class. Their proclivity to work in the middle, in the private sector, all of those things. But then, of course, for me, the more crucial thing is understanding the new middle class from their aspirational profile. And here, of course, I've been quite influenced by the work of the historian Sanjay Joshi, and his study of the rise of middle class in late colonial India, where he says that to be middle class is to inherently be a cultural entrepreneur, to develop and to articulate certain sensibilities and certain aspirational modalities about a way of talking about politics and a language of public contribution. And this is something I could not respond to in the point that you made earlier. But I certainly think that this belief that we had in the late 2000s period, that the middle class in India, all of them wanted to immigrate outside the US, right? That they had these post-nationalist secessionist tendencies, I think was slightly overplayed. And I think my interlocutors certainly play and sort of support that idea. There are people who believe in the power of the private sector, but it's not as if all of them believe that they can get a ticket out of India to foreign lands. Rather, it's an engagement with the public sector and the realm of politics, but in a different and new modality. And for me, that's where the aspirational profile, the way they talk about and the subjectivity becomes really important in defining them as new middle class citizens. On the final point, yeah, it's a difficult question, and it's a counterfactual that I don't think I'm prepared to answer. But I will say that even when social democracies, Nordic countries, it's not as if they haven't seen their own onset of professionalization. What is true is that the patterns of professionalization might look very, very different. And one key pattern that would be quite strikingly different between, let's say, how campaign consultants work in a country such as Sweden, where scholars have explored that a fair bit, or in India, is that there is a strong degree of partisanship amongst political consultants, even in Nordic countries, right? So actually, even in the United States, 90% of all campaign consultants in the US either work with the Democrats or the Republicans, right? They might switch between a candidate within that party bloc, but they don't switch party lines.
affiliations.
Whereas look at campaign consultants in India, they're constantly crossing party lines, right? And I think that again is a unique pattern to, in the case of India, emerges from the question of the hybridization of the social landscape that I think both of you pointed out in your remarks. So that is certainly a distinctive pattern, even in that counterfactual world, that I think India's pattern will stand out, the way consultants are working.
So a round of applause for our